Hello, welcome everyone. I am excited that you all can join us. My name is Andrew or Drew Brown. I am the Associate Director for Freshman Recruiting here at APU, and tonight I have the pleasure of moderating a discussion about our School of Theology. I went out and even bought a microphone just for this. Just kidding, I found it and started using it. So it's my pleasure to get to introduce Dr. Bowles, Dr. Mullins to you. We will have an opportunity just to kind of discuss first 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so. We'll talk about what are the programs specifically, and during that time, if you wouldn't mind just sending in questions to the Q&A, because for the second half of our event, we'll just ask all the questions you have. So ask about classes, or if you have an admissions question, you can ask that too. And we have an admissions counselor, Sarah Hernandez, who is available to type that in to assist you. So we want to be a one-stop shop for all of your questions. So the order we'll go in tonight is we'll start with Dr. Bowles, who will talk a little bit about the theology major. One helpful tip that took me a while to learn: we call it the School of Theology, but the School of Theology is an umbrella that includes the theology major along with Dr. Mullins of Biblical Studies, and then Dr. Duke will come in and discuss our Christian ministries, our youth and family ministries, and our philosophy programs. So without further ado, Dr. Bowles, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Drew. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Bowles, and I'm the chair of the theology department. And when it comes to the study of theology, and what we do in particular in the theology department is we're exploring the question, what do Christians believe, and how did they come to believe those things? And what's the variety of belief in Christianity historically and throughout the world? So obviously, Christian faith comes from the scriptures. The question is, how have people read the scriptures over time, and how have they applied that reading to their understanding of who God is? And so when we think of the Christian tradition, that's what the theology department is really interested in. And we're broken up into really two different tracks in the theology department. We do what's called systematic theology, which really explores kind of the great doctrines of the church. So what do we believe about God? What do we believe about people? What do we believe about the church? Those are systematic theological questions. But then we also have church history. So how did the church come about? And what does the church look like worldwide? And what's the variety in the church historically? How did the Christian beliefs kind of come about in their own context? And how does context contribute to the variety of Christian beliefs as well? And so the way in which I really like to think about theology is thinking about it in terms of thinking about being in a particular community. I think often when we think about community today, we think about the people immediately around us. And that's one way to think about community. And it's an important way to think about community, because we don't want to neglect the people around us, right? But when I think about community as a theologian and as a church historian, that's my main emphasis is church history, is I think about community in terms of the community historically of God's people. Now, what has God been about in God's people for all this time, not just in my particular community? And I feel like it's my job in part to understand that history, to understand that tradition, so that I can get on board with what God has been doing all this time. And so it's a different sort of way of thinking about community. And I really like thinking about theology in that way. Being in community with not just the people around me, but with the people of God historically and worldwide. And so because of that, the sorts of classes that we offer are pretty varied. And so we'll have classes like, your introduction classes, like an introduction to theology. We call it Theology in the Christian Life. It's a basic introduction to what do Christians believe, and what does that mean for how we live. And we have introductory courses in church history, and we do that one class in the fall and one class in the spring to cover the wide swath of church history historically as well. And then we have more advanced classes that we do also that cover a broad range of topics. And so we have one class right now that Dr. Justin Ashworth is teaching for seniors. It's juniors and seniors. It's a 400 level course. And it's a class on theologically what it means to be a neighbor. And so he's thinking about what it means to be in community and what it means to think about present day issues like immigration in terms of what it means to be a neighbor. And so we're always trying to connect what we believe with what we do and how we interpret the world. We also teach classes like I did a class years ago that Drew was in the first time I taught it called The History of Preaching. And this is a main emphasis and interest of mine. How has the gospel been proclaimed from the pulpit throughout history in different times and different places as well? And it's one thing to see how people have read the scripture, it's another thing to see how they performed proclaiming the scripture from the pulpit. And to me, that's kind of the secret history of the church as well. And so those are some of the sorts of courses that we're interested in as we try to navigate with students. What does the church believe? Why does it believe it? And what do we do with it?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, I surprised I didn't lead with this, but uh, Dr. Bowles was my primary professor through my theology days. So this is kind of a dream for me to be on a panel with him. But yeah, I also was a theology student at APU. And so I have, yeah, plenty of
And a very
wonderful
good theology
stories.
student as well. Everybody knows it.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I am going to pay him afterwards. But we will now move on to Dr. Mullins. Would you mind speaking about biblical studies?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yes, I'm Dr. Mullins. I'm the chair of the Biblical and Religious Studies Department. Just a few things to say about our department in general. We're really one of the largest and most diverse undergraduate biblical and religious studies programs in the United States. We have 14 full-time faculty, all with their PhDs, and we have about the same number of adjunct or part-time professors that teach for us. And I think part of what makes our program so special is that all of us have our own specialty. Dr. Duke, for example, specializes in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm an archaeologist, biblical archaeologist by training. And we have people who specialize in interpretation of biblical texts and other aspects of biblical studies. So that really gives every student a unique chance to not only be exposed to a broad spectrum of disciplines within biblical studies, but also to find that niche and find that professor, if you got that special interest that you can connect to. Um, Now, when it comes to the major itself, biblical studies, we have that as the major. We have three minors. Um, we've got a biblical studies minor. So if, for example, you're majoring in theology or practical theology, you can minor in biblical studies. But if you're a biblical studies major, you can minor in ancient languages because we teach Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic and other ancient biblical languages. You can also minor in religious studies where you're studying other religious traditions like Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, looking at this from the perspective of a Christian worldview. Um, there's also an opportunity to double major, like Paul here is in the theology department, and we have a double major in biblical studies and theology. So that's also something that you can consider. Now, as far as some of the classes that we offer, just to give you a kind of an idea, all incoming students start out their Bible studies, whether they're a major or they're just general education or they have other majors, just as a part of the general education program, everyone starts out at the lower division level with an introductory class on the Old Testament, which focuses on the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy. And then you move on to an introduction to the New Testament, which focuses primarily on the books of Luke and Acts. What is unique about our program is that most schools that have Bible studies will do the Old and New Testament as kind of a survey, where you're just learning facts and information, who's the author of this book and what are the major themes and so on and so forth. What we really try to do is to get you to read the text, biblical text itself, and how to interpret the biblical text and learning certain principles and techniques in reading and interpretation that you can then take with you to these more advanced classes. And even for students that are not biblical studies majors, these techniques of reading and interpreting the Bible are useful. Whatever career you go into, you do Bible studies in your church, or you lead a Bible study, or you get involved in some sort of ministry that, uh, where you're going to be utilizing the Bible a lot, these skills are going to be very useful. Now, once you finish the lower division classes, then you take upper division Bible classes. Most of the 300 levels are focused on the Bible, biblical texts. About half of our 300 level classes are books of the Old Testament. So First and Second Samuel, Ruth, Esther, Old Testament prophets, Psalms and wisdom literature. And in the New Testament, courses like Romans, Galatians, Gospel and Letters of John, um, Thessalonians and Corinthian epistles. Um, and then we've got courses at the advanced level, what we call the 400 level, which tend to be more on methodology. So we've got a course, for example, on global biblical hermeneutics, reading the Bible from different um, um, views around the world. How do different communities of faith around the world read the same scriptures we do? Women in the biblical tradition, women are often neglected as far as their role in the Bible, and we have a higher level course devoted to that. Post-colonial biblical interpretation, apocalyptic literature, end times, Revelation, Daniel. So that really takes you to that more advanced level. You also are expected to take um, uh, what we call a capstone course. You can choose between a capstone course in Old Testament theology or one in New Testament theology. But let me just kind of summarize things up by just saying that, once you go through this program, um, I think you'll have a well-rounded education as far as what the Bible is, how to read the Bible, how to interpret it responsibly. And before I go and turn things over to Dr. Duke, um, I think it's worth adding that we have a overseas program where one summer we'll go to Greece or Turkey, focus on the New Testament, Pauline epistles. Another summer we'll go to Israel, and there's an opportunity to tour the Holy Land. I did my doctorate at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and for many years guided Christian students around the Holy Land. And we do that also. We take students on this really first-rate tour of Israel. And then the department, we sponsor an archaeological excavation at the northernmost site in Israel, right on the border with Lebanon in the far north of Israel, a site that dates to the time of King David. And so this is an opportunity for biblical studies majors to not only learn to read the Bible, but how to live the Bible in terms of its living context.
Before we turn it over to Dr. Duke really quickly, Dr. Mullins is very humble. But I believe it was 2018, Dr. Mullins led the team that excavated the number 2 biblical archaeological discovery of the year. So that is something we are very proud of. And last time we did this in the fall as well. And Dr. Mullins also didn't mention that because he is very kind and humble. So I always like to just throw it in there. So Dr. Duke, would you feel free to just take it away? Take us home.
Sure. Well, good evening. Again, my name is Dr. Bobby Uke. I'm the Dean of the School of Theology, and I do have a teaching home in our Biblical and Religious Studies department. But tonight I'm going to represent our philosophy department and our practical theology department. So we have 4 departments in our undergraduate division: Biblical and Religious Studies, Theology, Practical Theology, and then our philosophy. So our practical theology department has 2 majors: Christian ministries and youth and family ministries. And this would be the major that if you are just feel a real strong call to ministry and you want to get prepared for ministry training, it would be in this department that you would want to to look at program options. There is a lot of crossover. So all of our departments on the undergrad side do share curriculum and have, say, some biblical studies built into our Christian ministries or theology built into our practical theology degrees and so on. Our philosophy department is one of the smallest majors when it comes to total number of units on campus. And it's intentionally built that way so it can be partnered well as a double major. So we do have students that will do a double major with philosophy because it's 36 units, as opposed to, say, our practical theology degree, which is over 50 units. So it's one that is a little bit harder to do double majoring. But our philosophy department also has two minors that you may want to consider adding on. One is our minor in apologetics. So if you're really interested on the various ways to kind of defend our faith and to think through the various ways that historically Christian thinkers have thought about our faith, our apologetics minor is something you may want to consider on top of your biblical or theological major. Our Department of Philosophy also has a minor in professional and practical ethics, which really is catered more to those who are non-School of Theology majors, let's say if they're in social work or nursing or others, to add that ethical component. But we have some very strong ethicists that you can get some good grounding. And I think all of us realize just in the recent history in our country, just the need for good thinkers, people who can think deeply about things and also include issues of faith. And ethics is a huge component to that. Dr. Mullins already mentioned study abroad, but do note that during your 4 years at APU, you'll have many opportunities if you so choose to study overseas, not just in classes that are connected specifically with School of Theology, but also just with general semester-long programs. Particularly, we've had a lot of School of Theology students that have gone to Oxford and have taken advantage of the Oxford program, which is sponsored by what's called the CCCU, which is the Coalition of Christian Colleges nationwide. And they actually run a center in Oxford, England, where you can go and spend a semester and work with Oxford professors on our disciplines like theology, biblical studies, philosophy, and so on. One final thing to mention, particularly for all of you that are considering going into a ministry field, Christian ministries or youth and family ministries particularly, is that we have a program in the undergrad side called the Vocare program. It's from the Latin that means to call, calling. But Vocare is our program that is intentionally built to help students be mentored during their undergraduate years and then be positioned well to go straight into seminary. And the way we've structured the program is that in 5 years, you can finish your bachelor's degree and your master's of arts and pastoral studies. Or in 6 years, you can finish your bachelor's degree and your master's of divinity. So the master's of divinity degree is usually a 3-year program on top of the 4, and the master's of pastoral studies is usually a 2-year degree after your bachelor's. But we have structured the curriculum so that you can, during your senior year, start taking seminary classes and really get a jump on doing your seminary degree. And through the whole time, you're being mentored by pastors that are that work with our Center for Vocational Ministry to have you be well prepared so that you will thrive in ministry. Our Center for Vocational Ministry that oversees the Vocare program is focused on helping people that have a call and get into ministry succeed long term, because we know in ministry it's a very hard but wonderful calling, but it's one where we need our friends to come alongside us and help us through that. So philosophy, practical theology, our Vocare program, there are a lot of things for you to consider as you think of the School of Theology and your future here at APU.
Thank you very much. Dr. Duke, you can remain unmuted because the first question is actually for you. So Dr. Duke has a prior engagement, so he'll have to jump out in about 10 minutes, but wanted to ask him just this initial question for students who were similar to me entering college. I entered as a youth and family ministry major. And I wasn't actually sure what I wanted to do. I just knew, and I wasn't even too sure about the difference between theology, biblical studies, Christian ministry, because it all had to do with the faith. What does that discernment process look like for students? And how does the School of Theology as a whole kind of come alongside students in figuring out what's the best fit for them?
Mhm. I think it can often be kind of multiple ways that you finally find the path that you're most interested in. Some of it is that very kind of one-on-one with professors, when you get to sit down and talk with professors and uh, really resonate with a certain professor. So feel free your first semester at APU to set up an appointment with any professor you want to learn more about why they decided to do what they're doing, whether it be philosophy or theology or ministry or biblical studies. And I think that is really enlightening to kind of learn what what caught their attention. I know for me, it was what got me into kind of the scholarship of biblical studies was during a conference I was at in Portland, Oregon, and the speaker was talking about John Wesley. And John Wesley in the 18th century gave a address to the clergy, and in it he encouraged anyone considering ministry. And at that time, I was in full-time ministry in junior high ministry in Portland, Oregon. That if you're wanting to really read the biblical text closely, you need to know the original languages. So I had done a lot of Greek, but hadn't done a lot of Hebrew. So I was young and single and I could travel the world. So I said, what better place to go to learn Hebrew than Jerusalem? So I went there for 2 years and studied. And again, for me, it was just going to a conference where someone talked about what John Wesley encouraged pastors to do 200 plus years ago. But feel free to meet with professors and find out kind of what was their journey. Because everyone in the School of Theology, undergrad faculty, and even our seminary, I mean, they just have a love for the church. They have a love for scripture, and they would love to impart that knowledge to you. I think another opportunity is just in your freshman level classes, because during your freshman year, you will take Christian life, faith, and ministry. You will take our introduction to biblical literature, Exodus, Deuteronomy. So during those classes, really start asking yourself, what is really most interesting, and what are you finding yourself drawn to? Um, uh, it is one where switching majors is completely okay as long as you don't switch out of the School of Theology. You have to switch to another School of Theology major. So that's the only rule here. But again, take advantage of meeting with professors, getting to know other students, and kind of try on different majors during that first year.
Great, thank you. So, kind of bouncing along that, if it's okay to put you on the spot, I'd love to hear from Dr. Mullins and Dr. Bowles about kind of a snippet of how did you end up in your respective fields? How did you realize biblical studies was for you, and how did you realize theology, specifically church history, ancient church history, was for you, Dr. Bowles? So, Dr. Mullins, would you mind going first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I would say for me, I grew up in the church. And so from my youngest years in kindergarten, hearing Bible stories, and especially in my day, the flannel graphs were very common. And I remember, so many of these stories, like King Saul sitting on his throne, and I wondered to myself, how do they know what he looked like and how he dressed and what the throne that he's sitting on looked like, or the dagger that he's holding. And so that piqued my curiosity, not only about the Bible, but the world of the Bible. And so by the time I was in high school, when I graduated from high school, I went to Israel for the first time and volunteered at an archaeological dig, um, a small site north of Tel Aviv, which was a Philistine site. And the Philistines, of course, you know from the Old Testament. And I mean, to me, reading these stories, I mean, I knew these were real people in a real place and time, but still, when you're reading them, they seem somewhat like in another world, like you're reading King Arthur or something. But boy, I tell you, digging at that site just brought things alive to me in a way that I just could not have, it just brought it live to me. And so that's when I decided, yeah, I want to, major in archaeology and in Bible. I did a double major for my BA, and then I went on to Fuller Seminary and I got my MA there. And then I decided to go to Israel and I did my MA and my PhD at the Hebrew University. And then I taught at Jerusalem University College on Mount Zion for about 15 years, where I taught courses in archaeology and the land, the geography and history. So that's kind of what drew me into it. And really, for every person, I think it's a different story. But the most important thing, I think, is to be true to your heart And this is where I think Dr. Duke's recommendation about when you sitting in class, ask yourself, because you will be taking a smattering of school theology courses, what really energizes me? Is it theology? Is it the more practical side of ministry? Is it the Bible? Is it philosophy? And that can often help you to center on a major, or even decide to double major or minor in one of the other disciplines. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bowles.
Yeah, when I started college, I went to Mount Sac. I went to junior college, and when I started college, I was going to be a kindergarten teacher, is what I wanted to be. And about my sophomore year of college, I felt a call to ministry. I grew up in the church. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and I started feeling a call to ministry. And so I decided that I needed to figure out exactly where to go to college. And I actually ended up here at APU. I was a student here, and I was a biblical studies major here, and I loved it. Um, and so I went to the biblical studies program here, and it was so transformative. And after college, I went to seminary and became a minister myself, and I pastored a small Presbyterian church locally in Temple City. And I always knew I wanted to teach, and I thought I was going to go on and do my PhD in New Testament studies. And for me, my story is that my direction toward church history and focusing on historical theology, it happened from the pulpit in the church. Preaching was a central part of my sense of identity as a pastor. And I remember about a year into my ministry at this church, um, I was working on a sermon on the Gospel of Luke, the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin, and I was really struggling with how to interpret the parable. The parables are hard anyhow, but to preach the parables is even harder, I think. And so I was trying to figure out how to interpret this parable, or both these parables, for the real people of God who were going to come on Sunday morning. And I was completely stuck. I had read so much and had so many different ideas swirling about. I didn't know what to do with all of them. And at the time, I just happened. I don't remember how it had come about. I was reading this small little book by Saint Augustine, who lived in the 4th century, beginning of the 5th century. And Saint Augustine has this small little book called Teaching Christianity, and it's his book on how to interpret the scriptures and how to preach them. And I just happened to be reading that book at the time, and something that Augustine says at the end of the first book of Teaching Christianity, he says that all of scriptural interpretation is geared toward the double love of God and neighbor. Um, and in all of my struggle with interpreting the passage, what Augustine said, it freed me up to preach that Sunday. I was able to do all my study as responsibly as I could, and then just choose what I felt was the most responsible interpretation, with the aim of encouraging the congregation to love God more and to love their neighbors more. And there was something so transformative to me in experiencing the history of biblical interpretation that freed me up to do my ministry. And I began to wonder, I wonder what else church history has to offer. And so I started getting into the early history of the church, how ancient Christians read the Bible, why that was fascinating to them, and how they began to preach it. And it became increasingly interesting to me, and not just interesting, but life-giving. This is what I love about studying the things that we get to study here, is we get to find things both interesting and wonderful at the same time. And that's what I found in history and theology, because it still resonates obviously with my history in biblical studies, because what we believe comes from the Bible, and then we read the Bible through what we believe. And listening to the voices from the past guided me for sure in how to read the scripture and how to preach. Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. I'm always encouraged to hear that. Um, yeah, I want in my personal experience at APU, I think um, there's so many opportunities to meet with people, meet with professors, meet with pastors, meet with campus pastors, meet with older students in the program who can help you in that process of figuring out where you fit. I came in as youth and family ministry, and it is an amazing major. Um, it wasn't the major ended up for me. I was a theology. I fell in love with church history. I could sit and read it all day. And then I had other people who came in as theology major and then switched to youth and family ministry because it was the perfect fit for them. So in your own process, I would highly encourage you to reach out and ask questions. Specifically, I would say to professors, but also to older people in the program. I think we have some of the greatest upperclassmen in the world who want to come alongside you. So we have a question from one of my students, Kara. So shout out to Kara. Um, Kara's wondering, it's actually a three-parter. So I'll break it down. Um, she's wondering, what do classes commonly look like as the levels increase? So how will the classroom environment itself change from a freshman level Exo Duke class to a even upper division um, Old Testament interpretation intensive? Would you mind speaking to that, Dr. Mullins?
I'd be happy to. For sure, the lower division courses are introductory. When you move to that 300 level course, it is still somewhat introductory because you've got kind of that background to the Old Testament overall, but now you're going to be looking at a book, and let's say 1st, 2nd Samuel. And there's going to be information there that you're just not familiar with, and you're going to be introduced to who the major figures are and what are those main theological themes. Um, um, but it's going to be aimed for a little bit more discussing, um, difficult topics like how do you handle, Joshua being commanded to wipe out the Canaanites, and how do you handle, the way that you take someone like David, who on one level is so heroic, but on another level has kind of a dark side to him. And how do we deal with that as Christians? And how do we deal with that in terms of, um, reading and interpreting scripture? So you are going for a little bit higher level there. The classes are usually about 15 to 20 students on your upper division. When you get to that 400 level class, that is where the classes are usually smaller, 10 to 15 students. And there you're going to really have a lot more robust discussion. So you might say that there's a kind of gradation, very introductory. You move it up a notch in that 300 level Bible class, and then you're going to move it up another notch. And every step you take up, you're dealing with more difficult questions, you're dealing with more discussion, um, and you're really invited as a student within a community to share your ideas and even get into discussions and disagreements, because it's in that struggle that we, I think, learn and grow.
Thank you. Going on the discussion trend, one of my favorite experiences as a student, and I didn't know if you would mind delving into it, Dr. Bowles, is kind of talking about independent studies. What do those look like? What are the opportunities for students with those, as well as yeah, how specific do interests get by student senior year? How does that funnel work where you begin very broad and where do they kind of usually end up in their interest base?
Sure. Yeah, this is a great opportunity that students have. Uh, it 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 happens sometimes where maybe a student gets toward the end of their degree and they have another class that they need to take in order to finish up that just isn't being offered that semester, or they've really caught on as they've gone through their introductory classes and the 300 level classes that they really have begun to collect a particular interest that they would like to explore more. And when that happens, there is the opportunity to approach professors to see if a professor is available to do an independent study in a topic that the student is interested in. And I've done a few of them myself, and Drew and I were in. Did we do just one, or did we do two together?
I think we did just one, the Eastern Orthodox
The
one.
Eastern Orthodox one. So one of the interests that I have, that I bring to all my classes, is an interest in the Eastern Christian tradition. And so I bring that to all of my classes, and there's always some students who really resonate with that quite a bit and want to learn more. And so, for example, someone like Drew, by the time he got to his senior year, there were a few students who were really interested in studying Eastern Christianity a bit more. And it wasn't a class that was being offered, but there were a few students who really wanted to continue on their studies. And so they approached me, and we did a whole semester just reading together. And we would meet once a week or every other week for 3 or 4 hours or so. And I would just send them off to read so much stuff, and we would come back and discuss and write papers. And it really was an opportunity for students to track their own learning and their own interests as they went along, and get toward the end and say, there's something here that I want to know more about. Often it's the case that you're going to get all that you need really from the classes that are being offered, but sometimes it's the case that there is something a little bit different or a little bit more that you might want to explore. And it is always an opportunity to ask to see if there are professors who are able and willing to do that with you, which is nice about, I think, both the tone of APU and the size of APU, that it really does lend to a greater degree of intimacy between students, and friendship between students, and knowledge and relationship between students and professors as well. I still have contact with students that um, I had in class years and years ago. And Drew was one of those in my first few years that I was here. And I just the other night uh, uh, FaceTimed with two students that Dr. Mullins knows as well, Jason and Rachel Regal, who we were both involved in their education here, and I preached at their wedding. And it's wonderful to be able to develop those sorts of relationships that are centered on learning together and learning each other together.
In the 4 years I was at APU, I went to 8 different professors' houses. So 8 different professors trusted me enough not to spill lasagna on their couches. Um, and I got
I didn't let Drew sit on my couch.
no, he didn't. I sat on the ground and just pet the dog the whole time. Um, I I got very spoiled. So right after I graduated, I actually went to the East Coast to do graduate school out there, and I was used to the class sizes, the discussion-based curriculum at APU. And I get in my first class, and it's in a lecture hall, and I think there's about 100 to 150 students in the class. And then I went to another class that was on German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I had studied Bonhoeffer in undergrad in classes where we were discussing his works. We were reading Life together and just these famous works and talking about it in class. And I get in the class and it's a lecture hall again. And I'm like, how is discussion going to happen? We write a midterm paper that I write the midterm paper, and I'm like, I want to build on this to write my final. So I go to the professor and I ask, I said, oh, this was probably a month after I wrote it. I said, do you know when I'm going to get that paper back? I would love your critique so that I can know how to write the final. And he just laughed at me because he was like, I don't have time for that. I'm not going to get that. It was a 5-page paper. I'm not going to get that edited and graded by the time your finals due. Um, and I don't say this just to, there's amazing grad schools out there. They're phenomenal. I'm applying, like, yeah, they're great. But I was very spoiled by the access you have to professors at APU. My sophomore year at a professor, we would read Augustine's Confessions out loud each week outside in our prayer garden. And then afterwards, I was going through a pretty difficult time in my life. And I would sit with him, and he would let me talk with him, ask questions for hours. And he would just answer and sit with me and not feel like you needed to have an answer for everything, which was huge for my own development because I very much thought theology was about finding all of the answers in the world, which it's not. It's about discovering more and more about who God is and how the church has understood God. So that's my one soapbox. I'm going to get off it. And my next question is a very easy one. It is, how do we approach interdenominational theology? So since we don't belong to a specific denomination, we're not Baptist or Methodist, Nazarene, how do we approach theology when our classrooms are composed of students who come from a lot of different theological backgrounds and some without theological backgrounds? I will throw Dr. Bowles this answer first. Sorry, good luck.
Um, yeah, there are obviously different ways that schools approach identity, and in some institutions that have a particular traditional affiliation or denominational affiliation that brings its own sorts of strengths with it. That there is a sort of broad consensus of a particular tradition and a particular way of thinking and reading, and that's helpful in many ways. Another approach is a place like APU, where the interdenominational reality here makes it so that what happens here at APU is that we learn a lot about each other, a lot about the variety of Christianity within the large Christian tradition. Um, and and to me, that has been ultimately helpful, to be able to believe the things that I believe, but to be able to welcome others also within the Christian tradition who believe otherwise. And this isn't I don't know, it's not a strange or a scary thing, I think, to reach out to difference. I think of one of my favorite quotes in church history that comes from a man named Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon, he was a really strict Calvinist. He followed the theology of John Calvin very closely, and the Calvinists tend not to like the Wesleyans, right? Because they're different understandings of how God acts in the world, free will versus predestination, these sorts of things. So Charles Spurgeon, in his book on predestination, he talks about John Wesley, and he says, even though there are many things in his theology that I despise, if the Lord Jesus Christ was in need of another disciple, he couldn't do better than John Wesley. To me, this is one of the lovely perspectives in church history. Um, uh, for someone like Spurgeon to reach out and say, even though we have doctrinal disagreements, still I understand that Christ could use you as a disciple like no other, right? And to me, I think the interdenominational character of APU lends to that broad understanding of what Christianity has to offer worldwide and historically. And so we have professors who come from Presbyterian traditions, Pentecostal traditions, Church of Christ traditions, Eastern Orthodox traditions, and we have professors from the Roman Catholic, and we have professors from all these different traditions who bring to the table what they believe and want to share it and engage with otherness, right? And in this way, I think it really is a sort of iron sharpens iron sort of reality. I want to know firmly what I believe, and I want to know firmly what you believe as well. I think the best sort of conversations happen between people who really firmly believe what they believe and also believe differently sometimes.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mullins, a quick, not quick, a follow-up question um, would be for students who, because students don't have to sign a statement of faith, and biblical studies courses are required. Um, for some students who maybe they come in, they've never read the Bible, or they don't think they believe in Christianity. Um, will they, one, not be able to do well in the class, and two, will they feel like they can partake in the class and be a part of the class even if they may not hold to Christian belief?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, I would say most definitely. Look, when I first started teaching at APU, and this would have been, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, I would say the bulk of our students all were basically your conservative white evangelical, just, groups. And what we've seen most recently is that we become very diverse ethnically, diverse religiously. We have a number of Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox students. We have Jewish students. And we have students that have no faith at all, or maybe they grew up in the church and they've moved away from their faith. And so they find themselves back at APU. So we see students with all kinds of different experiences. And I know that not only on my part, but the part of all my colleagues, it's always an invitation to everyone to, because, when it comes down to it, um, even if you grew up in the church, went to Christian high school, have studied the Bible all your life, you're never going to learn everything about the Bible. And there is a point, and this is part, I think, of the beauty of our kind of inductive approach to reading the Bible, is that no matter how little you know or how much you know, everyone more or less starts at the same place. How do you read this thing? How do you understand? How do you interpret it? Where do you draw from? And then I think what's also beautiful is just to hear other students' experiences. Um, there are Protestants that have never talked to a Roman Catholic. And maybe everything that they've heard about Roman Catholics has just been negative. And then they meet a Roman Catholic who has a genuine faith. And they go, wait, you're not what I always heard about Roman Catholics. And so for the first time, students begin to open up and to recognize the beauty of Christianity and its diversity and how much we can all learn from each other. And so, and I would say this is not only true with biblical studies, but it's really with all of our programs at APU. And that is also, to kind of add on to what Paul was saying. That's part of the beauty of Wesley, is that Wesley is the big tent guy, bringing together everyone, all these different perspectives, and all truth is God's truth, and so forth. So I think we really have an excellent context for mutual learning and interaction.
Can I add to that,
Yeah,
Drew, just real
please.
quick? I think in the end, the sort of uh, variety in an interdenominational setting like APU, and again, yeah, APU is a Wesleyan university, so the school has a particular tradition that we come from, and not a particular denomination. But even from that tradition, there's diversity amongst faculty and students. I think one of the strengths of this is too that when anybody is fashioning their own theological identity, um, the way best to do that is to understand yourself and other perspectives in honesty. And so I really don't know what I believe if I don't know a tradition that maybe I disagree with, if I don't really know it well and honestly. Otherwise, I'm forming myself up against a sort of cartoon or something, right? And so, in that way, that sort of variety, it doesn't mean that everybody just ends up kind of sloppily believing the same thing. No, what it means is that if I believe this, I want to know why I believe this and not that, because I'm honest about that and I'm honest about this, right? And so I really know what I believe because I have a better understanding of what the options are and why I think this rather than that. And to do that in an interdenominational setting, I think is really helpful because we do get to learn about the variety in honesty rather than like a caricature.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know exactly what to say next because this is just, yeah, both those answers are beautiful. Um it gets to the heart of why I work at APU. To be honest, like I love this school. I went to this school, but um, I I still work at APU not just because it's nostalgia or happy memories. I work at APU because I truly believe you get the opportunity to encounter um, otherness, other people, other thoughts, other ideas in a setting that prepares you to go out into the world where after I graduated, I, you know, you the world has a whole bunch of different thoughts, and a lot of people aren't very kind about sharing their thoughts with you. So APU is a chance for me to be able to practice engaging with others and learning from others. Yeah, I could talk for days, but I should probably move on to something, a good practical question, which would be, um, Dr. Duke asked earlier or spoke earlier about Vocare for specifically people going into the pastorate. What do we do to prepare students to go into grad school if they do end up wanting to be, my example, a professor? So I've always wanted to be a professor. How do you kind of help students guide them? And if you wouldn't mind speaking specifically to biblical studies and theology, Dr. Mullins, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Sure. I would say for students who want to do the academic route, I mean, one of the first things we emphasize is to learn the biblical languages. And it's worth keeping in mind that all APU students, regardless of major, have to complete 1 year of a modern language. Well, Hebrew and Greek both qualify. And so you can choose, one of those languages and complete that modern language requirement and also get your first real entrance into scripture. And some students will do a year of Hebrew, a year of Greek. Other students will just stick with one language and go to the intermediate and advanced levels. One thing I can say is that, our students, when they go to seminary, are usually at the top of the class. They know the languages so well. In fact, I can remember one of my Hebrew students, she was saying um, that she was, in her ability to read and to understand as she was reading, a Bible scripture was so far ahead of the other students that she was in her seminary Hebrew class with. And so she really credited our program at APU for that. The other thing I would say is you definitely want to do as many of the 400 level classes as possible. In fact, we've got a certificate of biblical literature that we give to students that maintain a 3.5 GPA or higher. They've taken 1 semester of an intermediate level, Greek or Hebrew. They've taken the Writing Three Women in the Biblical Tradition course, and then 5 other 400 level courses. Now, that whole certificate is designed really for students that want to go on to seminary because it's those 400 level courses that really focus on methodology. And so that really prepares you well for graduate schools. And we've had our students, they've gone to Princeton, they've gone to Yale, they've gone to Drew, to Duke, all of these top tier schools. And those schools, they want our students. In fact, many of our students, they get scholarships right off the bat because and they'll tell us that your students are among the best students that we get in our program. So these are just some of the ways that we do try to prepare students for that academic route.
Thank you. Yeah, quite a few around my graduating class ended up attending Princeton for graduate school, and they started joking that each year there's a new cohort, and they called it Azusa Atlantic, because that was like where a lot of my theology friends ended up going after they graduated. But thank you very much, Dr. Mullins. Dr. Bowles?
Yeah, there really isn't too much to add to that. I mean, it's everything that Dr. Mullins just said really applies broadly to anybody going through the School of Theology um, in any of the majors wanting to go on to graduate school. I mean, aside from the particulars of the biblical languages, which actually I think would be good for any of the students going through the School of Theology to focus on those. Um, I think one thing that I would encourage everybody in, if you're interested in the academic route, is the way in which I think all of the programs here in the School of Theology are designed and end up working is that they're very friendly for students who do want to go on to a variety of careers. And I mean, not everybody even goes into church ministry. And this is one of the things about students going through the School of Theology, as well, as that it prepares you to do well in whatever you do. I mean, it prepares you to think in certain ways and to interact in the world and with others in certain ways that just give people life and vocational skills in whatever they do. We have students going, to jobs outside the church, students going into ministry, and students going to the academy, and they're all going through the same program. So there are certain things to do. I mean, if you have particular academic interests, I would encourage you to talk to your professors in particular about that and get some tailor-made advice. But also just be aware that just that by having your interest sparked, and so working hard and doing well in the programs as they are presented to you, that is also the track in to the next level. Our students don't necessarily have to do anything special in order to go on to graduate school. The way in which the programs are preparing you, you are ready to do whatever you choose to do when you are done. If you choose to go work in the business world or wherever you can get a job there, if you choose to go into the church and get a job there somewhere, if you choose to go into the academy, these same degrees are preparing you to do what you want to do. Really, one of the main things is finding out what really interests you, love it well, and do it well while you're here.
That is, we got one final question that just came in. Dr. Mullins, what does the sign you have in Hebrew say?
Okay, it says archaeological excavations, entrance forbidden. So it's a sign that when we excavate, we actually have holes in the ground. And so we, at the end of the season, we put fencing around that excavation area and we post these signs on it as a warning for people, don't go beyond this fence because you're going to hurt yourself pretty badly.
What a great place to end this. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you everyone in the audience for coming and listening. I keep this between us. I love working with every student who applies, but I specifically love working with students of theology who are applying for biblical studies, theology, Christian ministries, philosophy. So I put my email in the chat. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to send me an email and I would be happy to set up a time to talk. And we can also get you connected with a faculty member if you want to talk more about next steps, about APU. We are here for you and cheering for you. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.